They didn't even let him reach the starting line. One of the officials stepped in front of his tractor and shook his head. "Sir, this machine won't even move the sled." A few drivers standing nearby laughed. Bright new tractors were lined up across the field, fresh paint, powerful engines, sponsor stickers shining in the sun. His tractor looked different. Old metal. Faded paint. A machine most people would have left in a barn years ago. The official tapped the hood with his knuckles. "This competition is for real pulling tractors." The crowd started murmuring. Someone shouted from the stands, "Save the fuel. That thing won't move an inch." But the old farmer didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply tightened his grip on the steering wheel and looked straight at the track. Because he knew something the entire field didn't. That old tractor wasn't weak. It was waiting. And in a few minutes, everyone watching was going to learn that the hard way. 3 years earlier. Long before the crowd gathered. Long before anyone laughed at his tractor. Before the officials blocked his path at the starting line. Back then, no one in the county even talked about the old farmer. Because back then, he was just another man with a small piece of land and a tractor most people thought should have been scrapped years ago. His farm sat at the edge of the county road. 30 acres. Uneven soil. A small wooden barn that leaned slightly to one side. Most farmers in the area had already upgraded their machines. Bright green tractors. New engines. Modern pulling power. But the old farmer still worked his land with the same machine he had owned for nearly 20 years. Faded red paint. Rust around the wheel wells. An engine that coughed before it started every morning. People saw that tractor and made quick decisions. Weak. Old. Finished. The truth was simpler. It was all he had. One afternoon the old farmer drove that tractor into town to pick up a few parts from a hardware store. As he passed the fuel station, a group of local farmers were standing near their machines. 3 massive tractors sat beside them. Fresh paint. Wide pulling tires. Engines loud enough to shake the gravel lot. One of the men noticed the old tractor approaching and nudged the others. "Well, look at that," he said loudly. The museum finally rolled into town. The group laughed. The old farmer slowed his tractor and parked near the edge of the lot. He stepped down calmly. He had heard worse. One of the younger farmers walked over and circled the tractor like he was inspecting a broken fence post. "You still running this thing?" he asked. Another man leaned against his own machine and said, "You know the county pull is coming next month, right?" The younger farmer tapped the hood of the old tractor. "This wouldn't even move the sled." More laughter. The old farmer didn't respond immediately. He simply wiped a little dust from the steering wheel with his glove. Then he said quietly, "How far did your tractor pull last year?" The man shrugged. 280 feet. The others nodded. That was the best pull in the county. The old farmer looked at the ground for a moment. Then back at them. "That's a good distance." The younger farmer smirked. "You thinking of entering?" Another voice added, "With that thing." The group laughed again. But the old farmer didn't look embarrassed. He just looked thoughtful. Then he said something that made the laughter grow louder. "I might." The younger farmer slapped the side of the old tractor. "You wouldn't make it halfway down the track." Another man added, "The sled would drag you backwards." The old farmer climbed back into the seat of his tractor. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. But before starting the engine, he said one more thing. "Maybe." The engine coughed. Then started. The tractor rolled slowly out of the fuel station lot. Behind him, the laughter continued. But the old farmer didn't look back. Because something had already started turning in his mind. Not anger. Not revenge. An idea. The county pull was only 4 weeks away. 4 weeks wasn't long. But sometimes it was enough time to change everything. That evening the old farmer parked the tractor inside his barn and shut the wooden doors behind him. The barn grew quiet. Dust floated in the warm light from a single hanging bulb. He walked around the tractor slowly, studying it. Every bolt, every hose, every line of the engine. He placed his hand on the hood. People saw rust. People saw weakness. But the old farmer saw something else. Possibility. Because what the farmers at the fuel station didn't know was this: that tractor had never actually been built for speed. It had been built for something far more important: pulling power. And if the old farmer was right about what he was seeing, then the machine everyone laughed at might be capable of something the county had never seen before. He reached for a wrench hanging on the wall. And that was the moment the real story began. The next morning, the old farmer woke up before sunrise. The county was still quiet. Fog hung low over the fields, and the only sound was the slow ticking of metal as the tractor cooled inside the barn. He stepped inside, closed the doors behind him, and turned on the single yellow bulb that hung above the workbench. The tractor sat in the middle of the barn like it had the night before. Old. Faded. But now the farmer wasn't looking at it the same way. He was studying it. Carefully. He climbed into the seat and started the engine. It coughed twice. Then the familiar rumble filled the barn. He listened. Not casually. Carefully. Every vibration. Every rhythm of the engine. After a moment he shut it off again. Then he grabbed a wrench and opened the side panel of the engine housing. Most people thought the tractor was weak because it looked old. But they didn't know something important. That engine wasn't the same one the tractor had been born with. 10 years earlier, during a winter storm that had destroyed half the fences on his land, the farmer had rebuilt the engine himself. Piece by piece. Parts from an old pulling tractor. Parts from a combine. Parts that had never been meant to live in the same machine. The result wasn't pretty. But it was powerful. The problem was something else. The tractor had never been built to transfer that power properly. Too much wheel spin. Not enough traction. The farmer knelt beside the rear tire and looked closely at the worn tread. Then he stood and walked toward the back corner of the barn. Under an old tarp sat something he had pulled from a junkyard 2 years earlier. A heavy steel weight frame. Most farmers would have sold it for scrap. But the old farmer had kept it. Just in case. He dragged it across the floor slowly and set it behind the tractor. Then he stepped back and looked at the machine again. For the first time, a small smile crossed his face. Because the idea he had thought about the night before was starting to make sense. If he could balance the weight correctly, if he could control the traction, that old engine might finally be able to show what it could really do. And if that happened, the sled at the county pull wouldn't be the problem. The sled would be the proof. He spent the rest of that day working inside the barn. Bolts loosened. Metal plates moved. Chains tightened. The weight frame was mounted slowly behind the tractor. Not perfectly, but strong. By sunset, the farmer's hands were black with grease. His jacket was covered with dust. But the tractor looked different now. Still old. Still rusty. But heavier. More grounded. He climbed into the seat and started the engine again. This time when the engine roared, the barn walls seemed to vibrate slightly. He eased the tractor forward. The rear tires pressed deeper into the dirt floor. Less spin. More grip. The farmer nodded slowly. It was working. Outside the barn, the sky had already turned orange. Across the county road, 2 neighboring farmers had stopped their truck and were watching through the open barn door. One of them leaned forward slightly. "What's he doing in there?" he asked. The other shrugged. "Probably trying to keep that thing alive another season." They laughed quietly and drove away. Inside the barn, the old farmer didn't hear them. He was too busy listening to the engine. Because now he knew something the rest of the county didn't. That tractor wasn't weak. It had simply never been used the way it was meant to be used. The county pull was still 3 weeks away. And the farmer knew he had a lot more work to do. Because what he was building inside that quiet barn wasn't just an old tractor anymore. It was something else. Something that might finally give him the chance to prove one simple thing. That the machine everyone had laughed at was stronger than they thought. 3 weeks before the county pull, the old farmer's barn lights stayed on long after sunset every night. Most people in the county had stopped thinking about the conversation at the fuel station. To them, the joke was already over. No one expected to see that rusty tractor anywhere near the competition. But inside the barn, the work continued. Night after night. The farmer wasn't just adding weight anymore. He was rebuilding balance. He removed the rear axle housing one evening and replaced worn bearings that had been grinding quietly for years. Another night he adjusted the fuel system, carefully tuning the engine so it could deliver power steadily instead of all at once. Pulling competitions weren't about speed. They were about control. Too much power too fast, and the wheels would spin uselessly. Too little, and the sled wouldn't move. The farmer understood that better than anyone, because he had spent half his life pulling heavy loads across his own fields. Logs, stone, broken equipment. The tractor had always been strong. It just needed to be disciplined. One afternoon he drove the machine out of the barn for the first real test. The sun was high, and the dirt road behind his property stretched nearly half a mile between two long fences. Perfect for pulling weight. Behind the tractor he chained an old steel grain cart filled with rocks. It was heavier than the sled most beginners used in local pulls. He climbed into the seat and started the engine. The sound was deeper now, more confident. He slowly eased the throttle forward. The tractor moved. At first the wheels slipped slightly in the loose dirt. But then the new weight frame did its job. The rear tires pressed harder into the ground. Traction caught, and the machine began pulling the heavy cart forward steadily. No jerking, no spinning, just raw force moving through the earth. The farmer watched the ground ahead calmly as he drove. Halfway down the road he pushed the throttle further. The engine growled louder. The cart dragged behind him, leaving deep lines in the dirt road. The tractor never slowed. By the time he reached the end of the road, the farmer shut off the engine and climbed down slowly. He walked back to the cart and placed his hand on the steel frame. It had moved the entire distance. Without stopping. Without struggling. A quiet smile crossed his face. Because he now knew something important. If the tractor could move that much weight across loose dirt, then the county sled wouldn't stop it easily. But word travels quickly in small places. The next morning, as the farmer stopped at the general store for fuel, 2 of the same men from the fuel station noticed him again. One of them leaned on the counter. "Still planning to enter that pull?" he asked with a grin. The farmer nodded calmly. "Yeah." The man laughed. "You serious?" Another farmer chimed in from the doorway. "Last year the sled stopped tractors with twice the horsepower of yours." The old farmer simply paid for his fuel and turned toward the door. As he stepped outside, one of them shouted behind him, "Better bring a rope so they can drag you back." The laughter followed him all the way to the truck. But this time something was different. Because the farmer wasn't wondering if they were right anymore. He had already tested the tractor. He had already seen what it could do. And in his mind, the county pull was no longer the challenge. The real challenge would be the moment the crowd realized they had been wrong. 2 weeks remained before the competition. 2 weeks for the county to keep laughing. 2 weeks for the old farmer to keep working quietly inside that barn. And by the time the county pull finally arrived, that rusty tractor would no longer be the joke everyone thought it was. It would be the surprise no one was ready for. 2 weeks before the county pull. By now most people in the county had heard the rumor. Not because the old farmer was telling anyone, but because people had started noticing something strange. Every evening after sunset, the light inside his barn stayed on. Sometimes until midnight. Sometimes even later. Farmers passing the road would slow their trucks slightly. They could hear metal clanging. Tools moving. The low rumble of an engine starting and stopping. One neighbor joked about it at the diner one morning. Maybe he's trying to build a rocket in that barn. Laughter followed. Another man said, "Doesn't matter what he builds. That tractor won't move the sled." The conversation moved on quickly. But outside town, inside the quiet barn, the work was almost finished. The old farmer stood beside the tractor and wiped grease from his hands. The machine looked nearly the same from a distance. Old paint. Rust spots. Nothing shiny. Exactly how he wanted it. Because pulling competitions had a strange rule. Everyone judged the machine before the engine ever started. And the farmer preferred it that way. He walked around the tractor one last time. The weight frame was secured tightly. The engine adjustments were finished. Even the worn tires had been carefully cut to create deeper traction grooves. It wasn't pretty work, but it was effective. He climbed into the seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life immediately. Stronger. Smoother. He eased the tractor out of the barn and onto the field behind the house. Tonight would be the final test. Behind the tractor sat something heavier than the grain cart he had used before. An old farm trailer loaded with thick concrete blocks. It was the heaviest load he had ever tried to pull. He attached the chain slowly, then climbed back into the seat. For a moment the field was completely silent. The farmer pushed the throttle forward. The engine growled. The chain tightened. The tractor moved forward slightly. Then the weight of the trailer pressed hard against the ground. For a second the rear tires spun. Dust kicked into the air. But then the new balance of the machine did exactly what the farmer had hoped. The tires gripped the soil. And the trailer began moving. Slow. Heavy. But moving. The tractor pulled the entire load across the field without stopping. When the farmer reached the other side of the field, he shut off the engine and stepped down quietly. He stood there for a moment looking back at the deep track lines carved into the soil. That load had been heavier than most sleds used in the county competition. And the tractor had moved it. That meant something important. It meant the machine was ready. The county pull was only 3 days away now. The farmer walked back toward the barn and parked the tractor inside. He turned off the light and closed the doors behind him. For the first time in weeks, the barn stayed dark that night. Meanwhile, in town, excitement was building. The county pull was the biggest event of the year. Farmers were bringing their best machines. Bright green tractors. Massive engines. Wide tires built for power. The same group of men who had laughed at the fuel station were already talking about who would win. One of them said confidently, "Nothing there will beat my machine this year." Another replied, "As long as that old tractor doesn't show up." They all laughed again. But none of them had seen what happened in that quiet field behind the farmer's house. None of them had watched that rusty tractor drag a mountain of concrete across the soil. And none of them knew that, in just a few days, that same machine would be sitting at the starting line of the county pull, ready to do something no one believed it could do. 3 days later, the county fairgrounds were already full before noon. Pickup trucks lined both sides of the dirt road leading to the pulling track. Families sat on wooden bleachers. Children climbed onto fence rails to get a better view. The county pull only happened once a year, and everyone came to watch. At one end of the track sat the sled, a massive steel machine designed to stop even the strongest tractors. Drivers walked around their machines making final adjustments. Bright paint. Sponsor decals. Huge engines rumbling loudly. People gathered near the fence pointing at their favorites. That green one won last year. Yeah, but look at the tires on that blue one. The competition looked serious. Professional. Exactly the kind of place where no one expected to see a rusty old tractor. Then someone near the entrance turned their head. Look who showed up. Heads began turning one by one. The old farmer drove slowly through the gate, sitting calmly on the same faded tractor everyone remembered. The machine looked exactly like it always had. Old paint. Rust marks. Nothing impressive. The same group of farmers from the fuel station stood near the staging area. When they saw the tractor approaching, one of them laughed loudly. "You were serious?" Another shook his head. "You actually brought that thing here?" A third farmer pointed toward the sled sitting at the end of the track. "That sled is going to stop you in 10 feet. The old farmer parked near the lineup and shut off the engine. He climbed down quietly. The official walking through the staging area glanced at the tractor and raised an eyebrow. "You entering the pull?" he asked. The farmer nodded. The official looked over the machine slowly. He tapped the side of the hood with his clipboard. "That engine even hold together?" A few people nearby chuckled. The farmer didn't respond. The official finally shrugged and wrote the tractor number on a clipboard. "Well, you paid the entry fee." He handed the farmer a number tag. "You'll be pulling later this afternoon." The farmer nodded once and climbed back into the seat. Around him the crowd kept whispering. Most of them were amused. Some were curious. But almost everyone expected the same thing. That old tractor would start the pull, move a few feet, and stop. The event started shortly after. One by one the tractors lined up at the starting line. Engines roared. Smoke drifted into the sky. The sled dragged behind each machine as the drivers fought for traction. Some tractors made strong pulls. Others spun their wheels halfway down the track. The announcer shouted distances through the loudspeaker. 260 feet. 272 feet. The crowd cheered louder with every new record. By mid-afternoon, the best distance stood at 288 feet. That was the number everyone was trying to beat. The old farmer sat quietly near the back of the lineup, watching, listening, waiting. Finally, an official walked over and waved his hand. "You're up next." The farmer started the tractor. The engine's deep rumble rolled across the staging area. The crowd noticed the sound immediately. It was stronger than they expected. The farmer slowly drove toward the starting line. The same men who had laughed earlier leaned against the fence, watching closely now. One of them muttered, "This should be interesting." The tractor reached the track. The official attached the sled chain to the back hitch. The farmer wrapped his hands around the steering wheel. Ahead of him stretched the long dirt track. Behind him sat the heaviest sled in the county. And all around him the crowd waited for the moment the machine would fail. But inside the tractor seat, the old farmer felt something very different. Confidence. Because he had already tested the weight. Already tested the engine. Already seen what the machine could do. And in just a few seconds, everyone else was about to see it too. The engine rumbled steadily as the old farmer rolled the tractor into position. The sled chain tightened behind him with a heavy metallic sound. Dust drifted across the track as the crowd leaned forward in their seats. Some people were already smiling. They had seen this before. Old machines trying to compete with modern power. It never ended well. The official standing beside the track raised his hand. "Driver ready." The farmer nodded once. The green flag dropped. The farmer eased the throttle forward. At first the tractor moved slowly. The sled behind him resisted like a wall of iron. For a moment the rear tires spun slightly in the loose dirt. A few people in the crowd laughed. "Here it comes." But then something changed. The tractor's weight shifted exactly the way the farmer had planned. The rear tires pressed deeper into the ground. Traction caught. And the machine started moving forward again. 10 feet. 20. 30. The laughter stopped. The tractor kept pulling. The engine growled louder as the sled grew heavier with every foot. Dust exploded behind the tires. The crowd grew quiet. 50 feet. 100. 150. People began standing up. Even the announcer's voice changed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this old tractor is still moving." The farmer kept his eyes locked on the far end of the track. The sled behind him dug harder into the dirt. The machine slowed slightly, but it didn't stop. 200 feet. Now the entire crowd was on its feet. 260. The previous best pull had been 288. The farmers standing near the fence stared in disbelief. That thing shouldn't be able to do this. The tractor kept pulling. 270. 280. The sled grew heavier than it had for any tractor before. The engine roared like thunder. Then the tractor passed the marker. 288 feet. The record. And it kept going. 290. 300. The announcer shouted over the loudspeaker. "We have a new leader." The sled finally dug so deep into the dirt that even the powerful engine could not move it any further. The tractor stopped. 312 feet. For a moment the entire fairground was silent. Then the crowd exploded. People cheered. Whistles echoed across the field. Even the farmers who had laughed earlier stood there staring at the machine in shock. The old farmer shut off the engine and climbed down slowly. Dust floated around the tractor. One of the same men from the fuel station walked toward him. For once, he wasn't laughing. He looked at the old machine. Then at the farmer. "I thought that thing was scrap," he said quietly. The farmer wiped his hands on a rag. "So did everyone else." The man nodded slowly. The scoreboard behind the track still showed the distance. 312 feet. The longest pull the county had ever seen. And it had been done by the one machine everyone had laughed at. Because sometimes the strongest thing in the field is the one people underestimate the most. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and become part of our YouTube family. We share powerful stories like this about determination, hard work, and the moments that prove everyone wrong.